like I mentioned, this is the time to do it. It felt like we were in a little bit of a lull from like innovation and ideas and everything felt like just B2B SaaS for the longest time. And now we're kind of like at this next big wave of technology to push us forward in terms of innovation and creativity.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Founders in Arms podcast with me, Immad, founder and CEO of Mercury.
And I'm Raj Suri, co-founder of Lima and Tribe. Today with us we have a longtime Silicon Valley entrepreneur, very experienced guy, Wayne Crosby. Wayne, welcome to the show.
Thanks, super excited to be here today.
You've had a very interesting career. I think you were one of the OG YC founders, right? Were you in the same batch as Immad?
I did the batch before or after. I think just before you did it.
So we were winter 2007. Yeah, so that was like
we did summer 2007.
Okay, so the next one after. But it was an amazing journey. Just like I remember when we applied, my co-founder and I, we sent in the application, and like literally the next day, my wife and I found out that we were expecting my first son, and it was like, oh my God, here we go. Like we're gonna actually like figure out how to actually make this thing either go or not go.
Well, then you sold the company within a year, right?
We did.
Or something like that. Yeah,
we did.
So that is a crazy ride.
It was a crazy ride. We like, so I was actually like born in the Bay Area, but then grew up in Arizona. So I was there with my wife, and we were trying to like figure out, are we going to build a company in Arizona? Are we going to build it in Silicon Valley? All of that stuff, you know. That conversation was still happening back then, you know, just as much as it is happening today in terms of like, is San Francisco still the hub? We moved out here. We sold the company. Like had a kid. It was like an insane year. Super fun.
I guess for the audience, Wayne built a company called Zenter, which eventually became Google Slides. And then you stayed at Google for almost 10 years, right?
That's right. I was there for a decade. So I went from, basically Google did 3 acquisitions almost simultaneously. They did one for Docs, one for Sheets, and one for Slides. And then they threw us into a room and they're like, hey, you're now our productivity suite. Go figure it out. And we were all built on different tech stacks, and we were all, right? Like, so it was like a wild ride while we were getting that going. And then once the productivity suite was up and running, did a bunch of other things at Google, did the kind of the ill-fated Google Plus, a bunch of stuff around there, but some good things came out of it in terms of one of the big initiatives there was sign in with Google. So I think everybody still uses that. And then did a bunch of AI ML stuff at Google. And in early days of that, I saw Jeff Dean give his cat detector talk. If you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. I highly recommend it.
But what is the cat detector talk?
He basically built this unsupervised neural net of all of the keyframes of YouTube videos. And then like the punchline of the whole talk is like, it's the world's most expensive cat detector, because basically all he can do is like tell whether or not a video has a cat in it. But it was like the early days of machine learning and AI, and I saw that and I was like, oh my God, this is the future. If you can actually start doing some predictive interfaces from an application experience, then you've like really got the holy grail on this stuff. So I joined the AI ML team. They're super early, and did a bunch of really cool things. Like at that time, when you were doing like Google image searches, you were doing things like, search for a red car, and you would still get, the alt tag image text did it have a red car in it? There was no computer vision in order to be able to be like, oh, there's actually a red car here. So it was a blast. All of the early kind of language model stuff too started to come out around, the Gmail autocomplete, the suggestions and stuff like that. So it was a fun team.
Yeah, I think, Wayne, you were the first one to tell me that this AI thing is real. You pay attention. This was back in 2013 or 2014. You're like, geez, pay attention to AI, I mean, a lot of the initial work that underpins ChatGPT came from Google, right? It's from Google researchers and Google papers.
That's right. So like, there's this famous transformer paper, right? And actually, one of the guys that reported to me is an original author on that paper, which is pretty cool. And he's amazing. He's got his own startup now, and doing exceptionally well, doing better than I am, and he deserves it. He's phenomenal. So Ilya, not the Ilya from OpenAI, but the Ilya from Near.ai,
Okay.
who's like a Web3 AI company. He's doing great stuff. I think like this whole AI thing sent me down this path. I think I've always been drawn to like how software can help people work better. This is like why I did Zenter. This is why I did my second startup, Umu. This is like why I'm doing my third startup. But like along this like journey, I found out that like there's this cool AI thing. How can that actually help make work better? And I realized like very quickly, like when we were talking back in like 2013, that AI was just going to like destroy all of the jobs, right? Like it was just going to take all of them. And I had this like existential crisis where I was like, oh my God, do I actually want to be a part of this thing that is going to take all of the jobs that are out there? Like we find a lot of meaning in work, and that's where I'd like made my career and like helping people work better. And like they're all just going to go away. And kind of through that soul searching, I realized that like I really believe that humans like to work. We like to come together as you know, creatures that like can build something that's bigger than what we could do by ourselves. And so like regardless of what AI is in place, it's like that's like a fundamental intrinsic like human desire.
But are we going to be like the equivalent of like digging ditches with spoons while AI is like doing all the real work?
No. I don't think so. I think like because we like to build bigger, right? Like we always like to do more. Like you could argue that you know, we're already in like a post-abundant society, right? Like we already have more resources than we actually need in order to survive. And yet we still work, right? Like we still build. And so I think like it's like super exciting time because I think what you're going to see is just like smaller teams be really successful and be able to do way more than they would be able to do historically. And I think that's like a more natural human state to work. Like we want to work in smaller teams that are like, we know everybody. We feel like we're actually helping each other. This other element that's happening is that, you know, when I started the first company in 2007, it was like the early web days. And if you think about like the big businesses at that point in time in the big part of the economy, there was basically like services and like manufacturing, right? Like if you were a company, you were either like producing something physical or you were providing a service. And like both of those models at that point in time, like were pretty expensive. Like if you were providing services, you had to like pay a whole bunch of people. If you were like building stuff, you had to warehouse it. And like for the first time, the web allowed people to like not have any warehousing costs and inventory costs. And so you think about the value creation and the wealth creation that happened as a result of that. And like now we're about ready to see the labor costs actually come down to zero, right? So like inventory dropped to zero. We saw all of these gigantic companies, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons of the world. And now you're going to like watch labor just drop, you know, the cost of actually building stuff to basically zero with all of these AI agents and everything else like that. You're just going to see this like giant boom of wealth creation and autonomy and like these giant businesses that come up with like very little cost. Super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And your third company now is OrgOrg. It actually went through YC again. Tell us a little bit about the company and like, you know, why you went through YC again as a very experienced founder. I was there actually for your demo day and, you know, saw you give the pitch, which was really unique. Got a lot of cheers, actually. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. So my second company didn't go through Y Combinator. We just went out and we raised our Series A. And I honestly regretted it a little bit when it was all said and done. And I think the reason is that when you're building a company, it doesn't matter how much experience you have. There are certain problems that you need to solve at each stage of the company. And so until you have actually solved those problems, it doesn't serve anybody to go to the next stage. And so while you might be able to fundraise, you know, and you might be able to like think that you've solved problems ahead of where you are, the reality is that you like are really best served if you just kind of go through the motions, work the problem, make sure you have your fundamentals right, make sure that the business is set up for success, and you really do like crawl before you walk and run. And YC is honestly the best at that 0 to 1 stage of any accelerator out there. I love the partners. There's a bunch of partners that were in my batch from back in 2007 that are running the show now. And so it's just like a great group of people to work through that early stage of the problem of like, is there something here? Are we actually solving the right problems for this stage? And I think like as a founder, your goal should be you should work with the best people at each stage of the company that you're at. That's how you're going to go the fastest. That's how you're going to get the biggest. And for that 0 to 1 stage, there's nobody better than YC, in my opinion.
I think especially successful founders end up attaching like a lot of ego to things, and they're like, oh, I'm too big to do YC again and like start from zero. And I think that kind of like thinking around like, oh, you're too good for something, or like you're attaching your success to the fundraise and things like that is like a very common kind of thing that happens with entrepreneurs. Trap. And I think it's also a trap. Like I think it's a good way to like end up failing.
Yeah. Immad, you didn't do YC for Mercury, right?
Yeah, I didn't do YC for Mercury. I kind of wanted to do it. I just knew it would take 1.5 years to build this thing. Actually, like my worst case scenario is that it would take 3 years to launch, which is why I raised like $6 million. And I was like, I'm going to have, it will take a long time. And with YC, if you're not a live product, like YC just doesn't quite like work very well for you. And then by the time we kind of launched it, didn't make sense.
Yeah, because you couldn't iterate in 3 months, right? You have to wait for years.
I didn't want to like go like, here's a bank account, it can't do anything, but trust me, it's going to be good. Like everyone knows what a bank account needs to be able to do. So the bar was quite high.
Yeah, I had the same problem at Presto where I was building a hardware product, hardware and software, and it was really hard to get it to that phase where it was sufficient for customers to buy. So we actually were in YC only after a year or so, a year and a half, I think, of working, where it was actually at a sufficient stage, to raise the next round of capital. So
I don't know if either of you guys feel this, but I feel like I owe a lot of my success to YC. So I wanted to do YC again just to like give back to them, if that makes sense. Cool. Like I didn't think I necessarily needed it from a money or advice perspective, but like it feels bad to me that like I haven't given back to them by like doing this company through YC.
A little bit. Like even when I raised for my second company, I went to YC and I was like, look, you were absolutely critical to my success, and I'd love to have you on board. And they're like, yeah, our model doesn't quite match the fundraise that you're doing right now, and like it doesn't work out, whatnot. So different times. But it was absolutely the case that it's like I owe a lot to YC, and every kind of the world owes a lot to YC, to be completely honest. Like the companies that we all use on a regular basis have been incubated there, and a lot of them wouldn't get funding without YC, right? So I think it's, especially in the early days, a lot of these ones that came up, they just wouldn't have existed.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about that actually. I was like, YC should have a program for like alumni who have reached a certain scale or stage where they have a program of just writing checks into their next companies at whatever valuation. Like they need probably a side fund or something. But
well, they've tried doing that, but like Wayne went through with his new company, and I don't know if Wayne got a special deal, but. I don't know if you could say Wayne, but presumably not.
No, I think Gary has already talked about this too. Like, so one of the things that I did after we sold the second company, that YC gave me a call and was like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm literally just sitting on my couch right now. And he's like, well, why don't you come be a visiting partner at YC, give back to the next generation of founders? And so I was a visiting partner there for a year. And it was a blast, like helping out, the next generation. And like I mentioned, this is the time to do it. It felt like we were in a little bit of a lull from like, innovation and ideas, and everything felt like just B2B SaaS for the longest time. And now we're kind of like at this next big wave of technology to push us forward in terms of innovation and creativity. So I had a blast doing that. And then, what happened on the side was, like I was building OrgOrg, kind of just helping out some friends, because after the acquisition, a bunch of people had attrited to other companies, as happens, and they reached back out and they were like, hey, why don't you, like, I really want the internal tools that we had at Humu to come to my new company. Can I have them somehow? And I was like, well, they were all custom built for Humu, but I can build a more generalized version for you. And so I just like built them for friends, and we started to see early traction. And this is just like you keep pulling on the thread when you're a builder at heart. You just like see something that's starting to work, and you just like, cool. Let me just keep tinkering with this and seeing where it goes. And so by the end of a year of like me being at YC, there was enough there to go like, okay, let's do this full time. Let's jump in. And YC was generous enough to be like, yeah, let's fund it in a way that makes sense for everybody.
That's OrgOrg, right? The company's live.
That's OrgOrg.
I think it was even. Okay. It's even like big part of the YC batch. A lot of YC founders are using it, right?
That's right. And so like a bunch of the companies were using it for group office hours and whatnot, and like easily find content on Bookface, because Bookface is starting to get pretty big too. So easily be able to jump directly to stuff. So it's been fun. Originally we bought I always love like trying to figure out how do you actually get the .com of a domain that you're actually trying to go after too. So turns out OrgOrg.com was owned by a guy in San Francisco. He's owned it for 10 years. And so, kind of do your internet diligence and figure out how do you actually get to them and have a conversation about how to actually purchase it. So that was a fun one too. So after he found out,
how much did you buy it for?
We ended up paying $20K for it.
That is so reasonable.
Right? Like a 6-letter domain. And then
Did you see that?
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Sam Altman just announced chat.com instead of chatgpt.com.
Oh, yeah.
Chat.com now goes to ChatGPT. And then I saw there was a tweet by Dharmesh Shah. Dharmesh Shah acquired he's the CTO of HubSpot. He acquired chat.com for himself just like a few months ago, like 6 months ago. He paid $15.5 million for it. And and then I guess Sam wanted it, and they know each other, so he traded chat.com to Sam for OpenAI shares, for like basically in kind, So it was kind of an interesting.
I love these stories.
Yeah.
I love these stories because like with the OrgOrg.com, once the owner of it found out what we were doing, he wanted to like put some of that money back into the company, which was great. So like now he's on board and he's ready to go. Thinking back to like the YC connection and the impact and tying it together with this domain story, when we were going through Y Combinator, one of the guest speakers was Evan Williams. And at the time he was doing this company called like Audio, which is actually why he was coming to talk to us. It was like a podcasting company back then. And he shows up and he goes, this podcasting thing isn't quite working out for me. But I think I've like stumbled on this other thing that's like maybe microblogging or something. And it's like, we're calling it Twitter. We don't know where it's going to go, right? Like super early days of this. And when he found out that we were building Zenter, and we were like struggling with a name, we couldn't like come up with a name to save our life. He's like, I've got the perfect name for you. And I was like, okay, cool. He's like, I own Zenter.com. And I will like, he's like, presenter, it's perfect. And he's like, yeah, I'll sell it to you. And I was like, okay, great. Let's do this deal. And he's like, actually, I just want shares in your company. So like this happens a lot, where people are doing these domain exchanges for ownership in the company and they believe in it. And it's super cool.
Do you guys collect domain names? I know Immad has a cool story too of Mercury, I'm sure. I think that's not an easy domain to get. But I'm just curious if you guys collect domain names.
Not really. Every now and then I do, but yeah. Do you?
No, I know some people do though. Like some entrepreneurs are just like always buying stuff, right? Like looking what's
this dude on the internet bought immadakun.com and I was like, "Can you sell it to me?" And he's like, I want 2,000 for it. I'm like, literally no one else in the world will buy this from me. Like, I don't even have like a good use of this. And I was like, I'll give you like $200. He's like, no, I want 2,000. I'm like, okay, fine. You could just pay the yearly cost. And every year that goes by since then, I'm just so amused by it and then he came back. He's like, no, I'll take 500. And I was like, nope, $200. It's like, I have no use for this. And I just find it funny that he has to pay every year to keep this domain that's useless to everyone but me. But yeah, anyway, Mercury.com was very expensive and a pain in the ass to get. I don't know if I've publicly said how much it was, but more than $1 million. And there's a company called Mercury.com. Mercury Interactive, this Israeli company, sold for $3 billion to HP. So HP owned the domain and they stopped using it. Then they spun off HPE. So then HPE, which was the software wing of HP, owned it. Then they sold half their business to Micro Focus, who then owned the domain. And it was still pointing to HP, but Micro Focus owned it. So it took a while to just figure out who even owned the domain. Mark Andreessen is on the board for HP, and they invested in our seed round. So it went from like the board to like who the hell owns this to like HPE to Micro Focus. So it took like 6 months or more to figure out who owned it, and then this lawyer in Utah was like, okay, it's ours, but like we don't want to sell it to you because we're like a $10 billion company. And and then I just kept bugging him for every few months until they were like, okay, we don't really need it. You can buy it. And then we managed to come up with like a nice deal where we paid for it over like 5 years. So it wasn't like too painful.
Yeah. Great story. I have one for Presto as well. So we knew very early on that like the word, we had, our name was Elacart, right? And it was kind of not easy to spell.
Oh, yeah.
And we had the product name Presto, but the company name was Elacart. And we're like, Presto is just much better name. It's easier to spell. It's easier to say. It means fast. It is a great name, right? And it has magical undertones. And so very early on, I was trying to acquire Presto.com. And, it turned out there was a venture-backed company from Kleiner Perkins called Presto. And I don't know if you know this. It was Joe Beninato, who actually lives near us, I think, in Los Altos, Wayne. So this company, what they did was they developed printers that you could send emails to, and they would print the emails out. And this was like meant for older people who didn't
remember
read
this.
email. Yeah.
Yes,
Older people
this.
don't read emails, right? And
What, they would mail you the printed email?
No. Basically, you would buy this printer for your like elderly parents.
Oh, I see.
And then you would email
so
them
funny.
like kids' pictures, and like they would like.
I hope it was great at spam.
yeah. And so I'm like, this company is not going to survive. This is like has to, everyone's going to be using email, at some point. So what, like the people who are using this product are going to die off, right? Like it's not going to, this company can't survive. So I kept bugging the owners to buy the company, and their revenue was going down like every year, right? So it was like just cash flowing out. The venture capitalists have totally given up on it, and I kept bugging them year after year, to buy the domain. They're like, no, we're a functioning business. We need this domain. It's very important. And then I think like 5 or 6 years after bugging them, they finally were like, we're going out of business, and now we're ready to sell the domain. And it turned out by sheer happenstance, they knew everything about us because their office was in the same building as ours in Redwood City for all these years. I didn't even know about it, right? Like they were watching us, basically they were like, we were in the second floor, they were on the first floor. They didn't have like any kind of marquee or any kind of sign that they were Presto. And we were like, trying to buy the domain from them. And the deal got done at $150K, which I think is pretty reasonable.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a great deal.
Yeah. And so it was a great domain. I mean, I think that the name is actually still really good for a tech company.
I was wondering when I started Mercury, which was, I guess, 2017, whether domains didn't matter anymore. But I feel like weirdly they matter even more than they've ever mattered. Even in the world of apps, like there's just some level of trust you get with the .com that just doesn't exist if you don't have it.
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, I see a lot of the .AIs are certainly popular these days, and I think those are starting to get a foothold in terms of credibility as well. And then Zoom also did they made .us kind of more of a normal thing as well. But like that's about it.
They're on the .com too. Yeah,
that's right.
I want to come back to the Google thing, Wayne. I think you have an interesting perspective on this. Like one thing that I always worry about with Mercury is, as you get successful, you stop being innovative and you stop like launching new things. And, when you first joined Google, it was still very innovative, right? Like they hadn't even launched Google Suite yet. And I can't remember if Google Maps was successful yet, but, that was like kind of the heyday of them doing new things and like really changing the world. Whereas like probably towards the end, I know you worked on AI, but they basically they invented transformers, but then completely missed LLMs or ChatGPT at least. So what's your take on, what was the change in culture? What happened that led from a very innovative company to like someone that like, still was making money, obviously, but was not innovating anymore.
Oh my God, I think it's like classic innovator's dilemma. I think there's a lot of really, really smart people at Google. It's still a great company, but for the longest time, they had this cash cow that was just like an ATM machine that was spitting out $1,000 bills every, microsecond. It's really scary to like try and disrupt that. I think it's, I don't have any insider information. This is somewhat speculation and kind of just as you look at it from a macro sense. If you have a way to monetize, and it's like the most efficient business model ever created, it's really difficult to innovate on top of that and be like, okay, I'm going to throw that away. I'm going to try and do something new. And until you can actually figure out how to monetize at that scale, it's just like is not a good business bet. Whereas like, ChatGPT comes along and they're like, yeah, we don't have really any revenue, so everything is better than nothing. And now all of a sudden they force Google's hand in order to be able to do something with this, and sacrifice a little bit of their business. And now they are being creative in terms of how they're going after funding it and like trying to create revenue from it and whatnot. It's almost quintessential innovator's dilemma. They just got stuck with their business that was working so well that they didn't want to cannibalize it.
What do you guys think about Google's search product and the revenue? I mean, like there's a lot of talk about people switching to Perplexity and ChatGPT for search. I agree with this view. Like I don't see how Google's search product will compete. Like search is kind of done, right? Like everything is going to be through AI.
I mean, they
prompts,
they can compete by adding AI, right? Like, I mean, at the top of my Google search, there's an AI
I know, but
snippet now.
They'll compete, but like that's going to be diluted, right? Like it's going to be like
Yes.
10 different sites versus like one.
Well, maybe. I do think I still go to Google if I want answers to certain types of things. Actually, I guess I haven't become a Perplexity user, and maybe that's on me. But I go to ChatGPT for things that are hard to monetize anyway. I'm like, what's the time light would take to travel from me to like Alpha Centauri or something?
No.
Like I'll go to ChatGPT for that. But if I want to go like things that are more monetizable, I want to buy like a baby crib or something, I'll go to Google probably still.
Or do an experiment, like switch your default browser to Perplexity. Just try it out. Try it out for a week. You won't want to go back.
I think the bit that is very disruptive to Wayne's point is like the blue links were out of control at Google, right? Like I remember when it was first like introduced, it was like, hey, we want to be very respectful of users. We're going to make it super obvious that it's sponsored. And then it became less and less obvious that it's sponsored. And now it's like, you can be like 2 page folds in before you get to real content. It's just ads. And you can tell like, the CFO was like basically cranking the wheel. It's like, okay, what if it's 10% more ads? What if it's 20% more ads like every single year? I think that is the bit that like kind of collapses against this competition.
I know that like for the longest time, certainly while I was at Google, it was like very respectful in terms of like what is the lifetime value, because obviously if you start putting there was like this kind of funny experiment that was run internally. No users ever saw this, but it was like if you just like add sexy to the end of any search term, your like click boosts go way up, right? For your ranking and whatnot, and where people actually click, and you can actually drive revenue. But like people get really tired of that really fast, and so like you kill your lifetime value of your user, but you can squeeze that lemon, so to speak, for a short amount of time in terms of boosting. And honestly, it feels a little bit like we're in that phase of like, okay, we don't see like the long-term path here, so let's go ahead and start squeezing this lemon a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, knowing that like the lifetime value of that user is probably declining. But
to some extent, it was also because like all the competition was crushed, right?
Yeah.
Like there was before Perplexity, there was no one else, so like there was no reason to not make the experience worse because your lifetime value was like kind of locked in.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think it's super interesting. I love the dynamics that are emerging. Like it's definitely a time to like shake up some of the existing sacred cows in the room and see what actually falls out. I think there's going to be some giant opportunities.
I met a very unexpected AI user recently. it was my mom. She was she's like, I love using Bing. I'm like, that was a very unexpected statement to hear. Bing tells me so many interesting things, and it turns out she was using basically ChatGPT on Bing, right? But like she loves it because of the interface, of the AI interface, and my mom is not super tech savvy, but actually she has a ton of followers on like Twitter and follow because she tweets out these spiritual things. So like so it was just very interesting to hear her say that. I don't know what's happening to Google's revenue right now. Maybe it hasn't made a big impact so far.
It's actually still growing. It's not. It's
Still
not.
doing great. They're doing great. They just like crushed their earnings last quarter, right?
Yeah,
like but they're diversifying, and that's coming from lots of different places, right? That's starting to grow.
YouTube, I think, is still a juggernaut, right?
Right.
Yeah, but search, their cash cow. You guys should try like switching your search engine to Perplexity, and we'll see actually what happens under the Trump administration now with this like antitrust thing that Google's been hit over. Maybe that saves them, if they don't have to like break up the company or any kind of pay any penalties, which probably will happen, I would think, but you don't know for sure.
I mean, it's interesting. I think the previous administration has been quite anti-big tech. It's actually not clear to me whether like Trump and Vance are going to be pro-big tech. I think they seem like pro-tech, a little bit more pro-tech, but I actually think they're like still probably going to pursue some of these like anti-big tech things. Like Google's still seen as like a bit of a woke company. And, there was this whole like Nazis in black Nazi thing and all this kind of stuff. So I feel like there's still like a little bit of anti-big tech sentiment in both parties.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily think there's going to be a pullback on that.
We'll see. Let's talk about that, actually. Let's talk about the election, how it's going to affect tech.
So what do you think? Is it actually going to change the startup scene? Is it going to change the landscape at all?
I think it's going to have a big impact, honestly. My view is like it's going to, I was with a bunch of founders yesterday. I would say, the mood was really funny, right? The mood was like, I'm sad that, because I voted for Kamala. 80% of, I think, San Francisco voted for Kamala, right?
I think it's more than 80% of SF. It's 80% of California. SF is presumably.
California's not all in yet, but SF is
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's 80% what I saw, and but all these ones are like, oh, I'm so upset because I voted for Kamala. Well, I'm not really that upset because my stock portfolio is doing so well, and the markets were way up yesterday, and like I'm going to make a lot more money, and I was talking to a fintech founder yesterday who's like, I was. In this current administration, I was like really torn because, I had one side telling me, one political party telling me, hey, my fintech product is great for consumers. And on the other side, I had like the CFPB telling me my product was unconstitutional. And like, he was like, this is really good for me, and there's a lot of people who are, I think, in regulated industries, biotech, fintech, many others, crypto, right? That are
and crypto is having a bonanza right now.
Yeah.
Coinbase is up 40%.
40%. That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And that shows you what impact.
I mean, I think, I think they've tried to underplay it in 2024, but the Biden administration was very anti-crypto, right? There was a ton of deplatforming against crypto. The SEC was after everything in crypto. So I think that is the most direct impact is going to be with crypto. And I think that's why you're seeing a boom. But yeah, I think everyone in regulated industries is like kind of taking a sigh just because, Republicans are always anti-regulation, but Trump in some ways more so. But yeah, I don't think big tech is going to be like, I don't think necessarily big tech M&A is going to come back or like this kind of anti-big tech, like judicial stuff is going to go away.
It's going to be really interesting because it's looking like
so?
there's going to be no guardrails, right? It's like you got Congress, you've got the judiciary, you've got the executive.
You've got everyone. Yeah.
You got no guardrails.
2 years. Wait, 2 years. Not longer than that, but 2 years, yeah.
Well, a lot can be done in 2 years, right?
That's right.
Not really.
So it's going to be a wild couple of years in order to see like what actually transpires here.
Is there actually a limit on how many bills that can be passed in 2 years?
It's more of like a practical limit versus like a theoretical limit, right? Both Obama and Trump in previous times where they've had full control, they only got one thing done, right? And Obama had even more like power. He had 60 senators, so there was no filibuster, and he only got Obamacare done, and Trump last time got the tax bill done, right? So history tells us like you can get one big bill passed, right? But you can get a lot of stuff done around the margins, like around executive orders and things like that. But it turns out you can't do that much, because what happens is you make an executive order, someone sues you, right, and like stops it like in the courts. That's what's going to happen for the next few years. There's going to be a lot of like lawsuits back and forth, right, and some things will get approved by the Supreme Court, but it'll take a while before it even gets to the Supreme Court, right? So, like, it's not that fast.
That sounds so different than pre-election. Like, what a different world we're living in. All these lawsuits that take forever, and it's just like nothing basically gets done. Yeah. I think there's a lot.
It's a feature of this. It's a feature of the system that like it's supposed to operate slowly, so that you don't get like someone new that suddenly changes all the rules and laws.
I mean, you basically need full alignment between all three branches of government. But the thing is, like, by the time you only have 2 years, so by the time he even gets to the Supreme Court, it's like the government may have changed, right? So like that's why it's hard to get anything done. So it's a really it's the way the system works, and.
I guess I'd be interested in your take on this. What do you think is like the best thing that like could happen in the next 2 years because of Trump and the new administration, and what's the worst thing that you think could happen in the next 2 years?
I actually have zero issues with a lot of the Republican, not zero, but like I grew up basically a Republican in Arizona and everything else like that, and then kind of moved in more an independent, and now I'm pretty centrist at this point. So like there's a lot of things that the Republican policies that I look at and I go like, yeah, these are like reasonable things. And then on the social issues, I completely disagree. And so like, I think honestly, the thing that I'm most worried about is I think like on the economy, all of that stuff, it's going to be fine. They're like put in together mostly reasonable policies. And yeah, there's going to be some issues around environmental stuff that we're going to have to clean up and fix and whatnot. But this is kind of like ebbs and flows over time. I do think a lot of damage can be done on the social side. I think like we've got a bunch of issues that are we were making a ton of progress in terms of LGBTQA rights and whatnot. And I think like those are going to get set back a little bit, unfortunately. And we're going to have to claw our way back. I think that like so I suspect like the biggest damage that's actually going to happen is more on the social side. I think there's a lot of stuff around abortion that could end up in women's rights that ends up getting kind of really muddied over the next couple of years. That's going to take a long time to unwind. So I think those are my biggest fears. There's actually not on the economy side. It's more on the social side. And then on the economy side, like you're already seeing it. People are like, cool, less regulation, let's go, right? The economy's booming. And some of this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, but that's okay, right? Like if it makes.
All right. So on the social side, that's your biggest concern. What's your, I guess, biggest like, optimistic kind of case?
The economy.
The economy. Yeah.
I do think like the thing that is interesting to me, which I don't know if they will pull off, is I feel like both parties have just been on this like spending tear, right? Like they're just like spending more and more money. I think last year we spent like 9% of GDP in debt or something. It's insane.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's more of a chance with like kind of Elon Musk, and if we're allowed to like go do government efficiency, there's like potentially like an interesting path there. But I don't know. I mean, Trump hasn't previously not spent money. Like tax cuts are also spending money. But there's maybe a chance that we could like try to like reverse that tide a little.
Mm-hmm. I think what happened in the last Trump administration, like he threw a lot of crap at the wall, right? And some of it stuck and some of it didn't, right? And I think that was actually intentional. Like they just did a bunch of random stuff, right? Like they put tariffs on everyone, and then they've just focused on China, right? Later on, and there was actually wide agreement that was a good thing, right? The China stuff.
And they stuck with it after.
Yeah, and they stuck with it after, exactly, right? Biden hasn't reversed actually a lot of the Trump policies, right? So, I think the same will happen this time. There's going to do a lot of random stuff. Some of it we'll think is crazy, right? But there's some of it will be like, and some of it will get rolled back, but some of it will stick. And so it's kind of like this like mass experimentation in the government side.
Yeah. I think the biggest downside that I worry about, I feel like a lot of social issues, like the states kind of determine those rather than federal. But I do worry about deportations. Like, I think that could like hurt a lot of people if there is like any attempt at mass deportation. I don't know what the right answer is. Like, I don't think it's great to have a ton of open borders and illegal immigrants, but also trying to deport, like, I think we're like at 30 million as a count of illegal immigrants, like trying to deport 30 million people. Some of them have been here for like decades. Is going to be a complete mess.
No. I don't think, I mean, they'll like deport a few criminals, make like a big scene about it, and they'll stop.
I mean, I hope. But I think that's the worst case, right? Because the stated policy is to do mass deportation.
Yeah,
so like,
I don't. I mean, Trump's rhetoric is very different from actually what he ends up doing. Remember last time, like he went into power, winning over Hillary. He's like lock her up. He's like, he had a lot of dark things at that time as well. But he didn't end up doing most of it, right? Like he ended up, like he is, his bark is.
But that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
A lot of that was because he had some guardrails in place, right? Like you've got a lot of his people who have worked with him previously being like, he is not fit. And now you've got, like he's going to make different decisions now where there aren't going to be those guardrails in place that like prevent some of that action. So we'll see.
Well, he still has a reasonable number of smart people around.
He does,
him,
yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Like I don't think most of those people would support.
It's different people. It's not like institutionalist. It's going to be more like, tear it all down type of people. They're smart, but they're still like, they have an incentive to like be more radical than like the people before. But it's still unclear what they can actually get done within the confines of the law, right? The thing that really worried me was like when they said like, who's going to enforce the law if like we control the army? Like that, that is like, that's the most concerning when like JD Vance like talks about that. Hope it doesn't get to that point. Like the thing is, I think the American people like would stand up to someone who does anything crazy. And like, if you remember, like there were mass protests, right? Last time when crazy things did happen. And, Trump ultimately, I think, will be, swayed by that, right? Like he wants to be loved. He has a desperate need to be loved, right? So, I don't think he's going to want to do. He's not an ideologue or like someone who is like willing to risk it all, to achieve like a certain ideology.
I don't know. I might disagree with that, but that's all right. I think it is going to be it's going to be more radical 4 years or at least 2 years while we kind of like make our way through this journey. But I think you're also right that like there will be some stuff that comes out of this that at the end of the day is that we'll continue to do because it actually works, right? And there will be some stuff that like just needs to be completely reworked at the end of it.
There's a very Silicon Valley type concern, which is, if we reach AGI in the next like 4 years, and that radically needs kind of government intervention or government involvement, is like, how would this administration kind of be involved, and would it be in a positive way? There's, I guess, a lot of ifs there, but what's your take on that, Wayne?
Well, I mean, I think this is an interesting one because, I mean, I hadn't really thought through all of the worst things that have happened because, like, as we've had this conversation, I can think of a lot more worse. But one of the things that is like not unreasonable is that there's 2 more Supreme Court justices that get put onto the court in the next 4 years, right? And so then you're looking at like 5 fairly young Supreme Court justices that are going to have to be ruling in this time when AGI is coming into existence in terms of like how to think about like what are the rights of this thing. The federal courts are just.
You mean young as in like in terms of age, or young as in new to the court?
Young and mostly, I mean both, but like. The bias is towards younger judges so that they sit on the court longer, but they will also be on the court less.
I mean, isn't that a good thing? Aren't they more likely to understand technology and AI if they're younger?
I think it just depends on like where the slant is in terms of like where the ideology is, right? And whether or not they want to embrace the technology or really fight hard against it. You're going to see like the federal courts get stocked full with judges as well, right? Because all of the approvals process can just kind of sail through. So I think you're going to end up with a very right-leaning court system that's going to be ruling on these decisions in terms of like what are the policies associated with AGI. I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing yet. Like we'll see how this continues to unfold.
I guess the general emphasis on deregulation, it probably means we get more AI acceleration, not less. I think that was one of the main potential impediments to like AI progress is like regulation, right?
I think so. I also think that like there is a happy medium between like the M&A market and like where we are today, right? Like the big bullies of like buying everybody up and what you're concerned about with the FTC and whatnot, monopolistic behaviors, and like a healthy ecosystem of companies wanting to like innovate and build and then find a place where they can scale and grow inside of larger organizations. And so I think, a little deregulation on that would also, it's probably a good thing for the overall ecosystem.
I think one thing I'm concerned about, I would say, with Trump is like what happens with in foreign policy, right? We don't really talk about it much here, but he's supposed to end the Ukraine war imminently. So let's see what happens there, right? But it could embolden enemies, or he could actually solve the problem. He's unpredictable. So I think.
I think generally he was being better. Well, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were both fairly neocons, right? Like there was a lot of war in the last 24-ish years. I feel like Trump is actually kind of anti-war. Like at least in that one, I would say he's much more likely to be better at like peace than.
You can be anti-war if you want, but if other people want to start wars, you can't be anti-war. You have to fight the wars. So it's like, the U.S. As a nation has been anti-war in the first like half of the 20th century, but didn't mean that we could avoid wars. We had to fight.
I don't think the U.S. has been anti-war since 2001. The U.S. has created a lot of wars.
I'm saying from 1900 to like 1950, the U.S. was very reluctant to get into any wars, right? Like they're a very isolationist country. But like the wars found us, right? And you could argue that if we didn't, the reason the policies that we have today were because of those world wars. And because the wars found us, and we're like, hey, we can't let the wars get to that point before like we get involved, right? So that is the real risk of like the wars getting to a point. We just basically stay back, let the wars happen, let whatever happen, in the world, and then it gets to a point that we have to be involved anyways, and it's much worse at that time.
Yeah, but I think this idea of the U.S. being like the world police, which has been around since like I guess 1990, is just an idea that can't stick anymore. Like there's just too many other, like we're not in a unipolar world anymore.
I completely agree with that. We gotta like stop sticking our nose in everybody else's business and pull it back home a little bit. There's going to be stuff that happens all over the world that we aren't necessarily responsible for. We gotta just like let some of that go. I don't know. Like I'm not speaking about Ukraine specifically, or like I am a big believer in nation rights, and if nations are getting if the borders are being attacked, you have an absolute right to defend yourself. And if we want to be an arms dealer and some of that stuff, maybe that makes sense. But like we shouldn't be getting involved in this beyond that, in my opinion. But I think Raj disagrees. I'm a Silicon Valley founder. What do I know, right? Like this is
we've gone way outside.
I just want to make that comment because on the record, let's see what happens on the geo. That's actually to me the biggest risk of Trump. I
guess to tie it back to tech, I do think there's going to be a complete and massive boom in defense tech startups in the next 4 years. I mean, that's already started with Anduril, but combination of drones and AI means there's like a big technology disruption and then a big change in kind of the need for innovation. And I think the government is also supportive of like kind of startups in this space. So there was a YC company actually in the last batch, Ares Manufacturing, which was the first kind of, they're building like mini defensive cruise missiles for naval ships.
I saw a tweet from Elon like replying to Palmer Luckey's like, yeah, we're going to get you some better contracts and like figure out like how we're going to, help boost your company. It's kind of
wow. Elon's already striking deals.
Striking deals already. Yeah. What do you think Elon's going to? I mean, like Elon's impact in the government. Like, first of all, can he actually keep peace with Trump for that long?
Well, Raj, you were quite skeptical about whether Elon swayed or helped sway this
for sure.
election.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's very clear that he was quite a pivotal part of swaying the election, but you don't think so?
No.
I don't think so.
It's too broad.
You don't think so?
It's too
Wow.
broad a change. If like Trump like just won Pennsylvania or like one other state, I would have probably, maybe Elon did make the difference, but Trump won very convincingly. And exit polls are very clear that people were just unhappy with rising prices. Under the Biden administration, it's very obvious. They didn't find anything with Kamala's plan, like it's going to solve the problem. And people just have better memories of the Trump 4 years than they do of the last 4 years. So they just have a very simple.
I think that's recency bias more than anything. But
Pardon?
like, people forget, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of recency bias.
Yeah, there's a lot of recency
Yeah.
bias. Yeah. And people just want, have a better memory of 4 years ago, but which is true for everyone. People still have like a better memory of George W. Bush now than they did when he was in office. He left office at 20.
Yeah, and they used to hit him back then.
Yeah. People just forget how much they hate these people. And by the way, same with Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton was running, like her approval rating was low, but when she left, like her approval rating went up. It's just the way that human psyche.
The psychology of this is super interesting. Yeah, humans are fickle.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually like a healthy thing that you don't remember the negative things as much. It's actually like if you find someone who is too focused on like remembering the bad things in their past, they tend to be actually quite unhealthy. Mm-hmm. It's much better to just remember positive things and like try to forget the bad stuff because otherwise life is hard. Maybe this is a good note to end on. I feel like we could keep chatting for a long time, but this is really fun. Thanks for joining, Wayne.
Of course. Great being here. Thank you both.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. You can find us on all the regular podcast channels, join our tribe group, and see you next time.